This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 309 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Today is a 15 transactions day, but before digging in, I wanted to send you guys another reminder to check out OddsFire. It's an awesome odds comparison tool that NumberFire engineers put together, and it allows you to easily see odds across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. I use it a lot for analyzing things like line movement because that can dictate who I play in my fantasy leagues each week. But go check it out at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Hold or buy Ronald Jones. Look, I've made it known on this podcast the last couple of years that I'm not the biggest Ronald Jones fan, or I wasn't the biggest Ronald Jones fan as he entered the NFL. And I had Jones as a sell candidate back in like week 1 or week 2 because I wasn't ready to buy into the Tampa Bay rushing attack. And I think that advice was the right advice given both the process and the result. But things change with new information. And Sunday's performance for Ronald Jones was a big performance. Not just because he was able to get 82 yards and a touchdown, but because his peripheral numbers looked better than we've seen all season long. Against Seattle, Jones saw 78.3% of Tampa Bay's running back rushes. That's his highest single game share of the season. He ended the game with a 4.7% target share, which is a number that he's only hit twice this year. And according to Pro Football Focus, he ran 18 routes. That was also a season high. Now, most importantly, from a snap share standpoint, Jones was on the field for 53% of Tampa Bay's snaps. That also is the best mark of the season for him. And it's the highest snap share for any Buccaneers running back since week 2. Now, I think that there's some concern about how effective the Buccaneers can be running the ball and utilizing their running backs as receivers. But week 9 against Seattle was nothing but great for Ronald Jones. If the manager in your league who has Ronald Jones isn't that much of a believer, I would send a trade offer. Buy Davante Adams. So the Packers didn't look all that great with Davante Adams back on the field on Sunday. He had just 41 yards receiving. But this also brings a nice buy low opportunity. In that game, Davante Adams saw a 31.4% target share. In his 5 active games this year, he's gone below a 26.5% target share just once. He's going to be fed in this offense. And that's the first big hurdle in becoming a fantasy football stud. But the thing is, he hasn't found the end zone this year. We know that yards correlate strongly to touchdowns. I talk about it basically every single episode of this show. And based on Davante Adams' 419 receiving yards, when you look at how wide receivers have scored with that type of receiving yardage over the last 5 years, he should have about 2.6 touchdowns. And like I said, he hasn't scored yet. That makes him one of the biggest positive touchdown regression candidates in all of football. So if you can buy Davante Adams low, I would do it. Sell Derrick Henry. People might think that I'm a Derrick Henry hater because I seem to talk about him as a sell a lot on this show. But I actually don't mind Derrick Henry the player. I hate the Tennessee Titans offense, and I hate the way that they use him. As I said in the 15 transactions column this week on NumberFire, Henry's like a late season episode of How I Met Your Mother. He's fine. He'll likely give you RB2 numbers from here on out given the state of the running back position, but considering his lack of receiving usage, I don't see where the upside is unless he has one of those outlier type runs like we witnessed at the end of last year. Derrick Henry now has 8 total touchdowns this season, but based on his yardage totals, he should have closer to 5. And you might think that he's going to outperform the yards to touchdowns conversion because of the work that he's going to see at the goal line. But guys, Derrick Henry only has 5 carries from within the 5-yard line this year. That ties him for 26th in the NFL. And that's because the Titans offense isn't very good. They rank 7th worst in yards per drive, and as a result of not moving the ball that well, they've run the 4th fewest red zone plays. And considering Derrick Henry has a target share that's below 7%, we know his upside is likely going to come down to his rushing yards and his rushing touchdowns. And his rushing touchdowns, like I just talked about, they're going to be kind of hard to come by because this offense isn't very good. And that makes him an obvious sell. Now, I should note, they do get Kansas City this week. That's a good matchup on paper. So if you want to wait to sell Derrick Henry, it's understandable. But like I talk about a lot on this show, a good matchup doesn't guarantee good production. So if Derrick Henry doesn't perform, his value is going to diminish. And do keep in mind that the Titans get the Texans and the Saints during the fantasy football playoffs in weeks 15 and 16. Right now, both Houston and New Orleans rank in the top 8 in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So there's a chance that Derrick Henry could struggle when you need him the most. Buy Marquise Brown. So Hollywood Brown was on the field for the first time since week 5 on Sunday night against New England. And while he didn't have a great fantasy line, he did look like his explosive self when he had the ball in his hands. Now, don't forget, when Brown was healthy across the first 5 games of the season, his target share never went below 17.9% in a single game. It was 17.3% on Sunday night. But that's in a game where he was returning from injury and facing one of the best secondaries in football. He only played 57% of Baltimore's snaps. His snap share started to reach the 80% range when he was healthy, or before the injury. I just think that Hollywood Brown is the type of player who could take off during the final portion of the fantasy football season. And that's especially true because in the fantasy playoffs, the Ravens get the Jets and the Browns. Add Davante Parker. From weeks 1 through 6, the Dolphins were averaging 21.6 yards per drive. They were scoring on 16.7% of their drives. Both of those numbers are the second worst in football. And then Ryan Fitzpatrick took over this offense once again. Over the last 3 weeks with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center, Miami's ranked 11th from the bottom in yards per drive, and they've scored on 29% of their drives as a result. That's also a huge increase. Preston Williams and Davante Parker have both benefited. During the first 6 weeks of the season, Parker and Williams finished as top 20 wide receivers in weekly scoring just once. They finished as top 30 ones just twice. Over the last 3 weeks, those 2 wide receivers have accumulated 3 top 20 performances and 4, almost 5 of them, top 30 ones. And both of those wide receivers have been averaging about a 23.5% target share during this time. Now, unfortunately, Preston Williams is now out for the year. He would have been a great waiver wire add, but he's now out. But I think the data that I just shared sheds some light to the opportunity in Miami's offense. Davante Parker, as a result, should absolutely be added this week. Sell Adrian Peterson. So with Bill Callahan as head coach for Washington, Adrian Peterson has averaged 95.6 rushing yards on nearly 19 attempts per game because Callahan loves to establish the run. Peterson has seen at least 80% of the team's running back carries in every single Callahan coach game. Now, in turn, Peterson's ranked as a top 20 running back in weekly PPR scoring in 3 of 4 games under Callahan. But there are some problems. Peterson's still not being heavily utilized as a receiver. He's averaging a little over a target per game right now. And Peterson is continuing to give us a floor rather than a ceiling. He's been consistent, but there have still been 26 running backs with at least 2 games played over this time frame during Bill Callahan as head coach who have averaged more PPR points per game than Adrian Peterson. And it's not just because his lack of involvement as a receiver, it's also the offense that he's in. It's the lack of scoring. Now, typically, a player with a lot of yards, we'd expect him to score more touchdowns. Generally speaking, I would be saying buy Adrian Peterson. But this offense is really not great. Regardless of the opponents that they've had, they're averaging under 9 points per game under Bill Callahan. And then there's one big issue for Adrian Peterson moving forward. Darius Geis could be returning. Add Darius Geis. So like I just said, Darius Geis could be returning to this Washington offense. It's not the best place for running backs to thrive though. But Geis does present more upside than Adrian Peterson because there's a chance that they just feature him as the team's workhorse. Unlike Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis could see more work as a receiver. Wendell Smallwood has taken some of that work. Over the last 2 weeks, he has 5 targets. So like I said on last week's mailbag show, it's hard to sell Darius Geis as a league-winning ad considering the offense he's going to be playing in. But given the fact that he should be returning in week 11, he should be rostered. Buy DJ Chark. There's going to be a lot of fantasy managers who are questioning Jacksonville's passing attack after what they did in London this past week. And that creates a buy low opportunity. Now, DJ Chark is overperforming in the touchdown column. Given his yardage total, he has 1.8 more touchdowns than he probably should. But there's a lot to like about his situation. He's seen over 23% of Jacksonville's targets this year, and he's hit a 20% target share in 5 of his last 6 games. And take a look at Jacksonville's schedule down the stretch. They still get to face Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and Oakland. And the games against Atlanta and Oakland are during the fantasy football playoffs. Those 2 teams are allowing the 4th most and 2nd most fantasy points to opposing wideouts this year. So if you're feeling good about making the playoffs, I think DJ Chark is a great buy. But even if you're not, I still think he's fine. Buy DJ Moore. Another DJ to trade for this week is DJ Moore. Over his last 4 games, he hasn't had a target share below 24.3%. He's seeing a ton of volume in this offense. He just hasn't really blown up because he hasn't found the end zone since week 3. But his 564 receiving yards tell us that he should have 2.4 more touchdowns than he currently has. Only 7 skill players have a larger discrepancy between the number of touchdowns they've scored and the number of touchdowns they should have scored based on their yardage totals. So I like DJ Moore as a buy. Add Zach Pascal. With T.Y. Hilton sidelined, Zach Pascal stepped in for Indy and he saw 20% of the team's targets on Sunday against Pittsburgh. That led the team. And he was productive. He got 5 of his 6 targets for 75 yards and a touchdown. Hilton's expected to miss a few weeks, or at least 1 or 2 more. That makes Pascal a good waiver wire ad for wide receiver needy teams. Sell Jamaal Williams. So since Jamaal Williams has come back from that really awful concussion back in week 4, so we have 4 weeks, he's ranked as the RB4 in PPR points per game at the running back position. And meanwhile, during this time, he's hit a 50% snap share in a single game just once. That alone tells us that you should probably be selling Jamaal Williams right now. And it's true, you should. Williams has been fortunate to have scored at least once in each of these last 4 games. And now, as you'd probably guess, he's a pretty big negative touchdown regression candidate. His yardage total dictates that he should have 3.6 fewer touchdowns than he currently has. Like, honestly, it'd be one thing if Williams was leading the backfield in snaps, or if he was seeing a consistent target share above 15 or 20%. But that hasn't been the case. Like I just said, he's rarely hitting the 50% snap share mark, and he's been below the 10% target share mark in 2 of his last 4 games. Add Gus Edwards. This transaction is really just to say, add your freaking handcuffs. This is the time of year that you should be adding handcuffs. Gus Edwards is just one of them. You need to get Alexander Mattison, Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt, Rashad Penny. Add handcuffs. Add handcuffs of running backs that aren't even on your team. They're better flyers than the majority of wide receivers or even some running backs that are on your roster right now. Because if an injury happens, those players are going to be relevant. You don't need the wide receiver who's going to randomly get you 50 yards during a bye week fill-in. You can find that on the waiver wire. Buy Allen Robinson. Now look, it doesn't feel good targeting a Mitch Trubisky wide receiver in a trade right now. And I guess you could make the case that the Bears offense could be worse down the stretch here in 2019. But it's really difficult to ignore 2 things with Allen Robinson. First, you're buying him at a low point. That's great. But number 2, he still has amazing peripherals. He caught just 1 pass for 6 yards in a great matchup on Sunday, but he still saw over 23% of Chicago's targets. He's now hit a 21% target share in every single game this year. Only Michael Thomas can say the same thing. And realistically, if you look at Chicago's schedule, it's not too bad. That's especially true in the fantasy playoffs where they're going to get Green Bay and Kansas City. There could be a lot of passing from the Bears offense in those matchups. Add Ryan Tannehill. So with so many teams on bye this week, streaming sucks. Whether it's defensive streaming or quarterback streaming, it kind of sucks. Quarterback streaming especially. But I think Ryan Tannehill looks like the best off the waiver wire play. The Titans are going up against the Chiefs in a game where Patrick Mahomes should be back. And if that's the case, and to be honest, even if it's not the case, it could force Tennessee to not run the ball as much. Kansas City's allowed the 11th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks this year, and 3 of the last 4 quarterbacks that they've faced have performed above their season-long averages. Add the Indianapolis Colts defense. According to FanDuel Sportsbook, the Colts are 10.5-point favorites this weekend at home against Miami. Ryan Fitzpatrick has thrown at least 1 interception in all but 1 start this season. It happened last week against the Jets where he didn't throw an interception. And he's taken 4 sacks in each of his last 2 games. Now, despite an average performance on Sunday, the Dolphins are still being sacked at the 3rd highest rate in football. The Colts are available in 63% of Yahoo leagues, and I think they're a good streamer this week. The 16th transaction that you can't get in my weekly 15 transactions column over on numberfire.com this week is kind of an interesting one. It's kind of a high variance one, but it's to buy Ty Johnson. Trey Carson is now out of the picture for the Lions. And on Sunday, Ty Johnson handled over 56% of Detroit's running back carries, which was a 26% increase from the previous week. His target share wasn't amazing at 7.3%, but at least he was still involved in the passing game. But more importantly, Johnson played 62% of Detroit's snaps. That's the 5th highest mark for any Lions running back this year. And it was a 24% increase from last week. Now, I'm not expecting RB1 numbers from Ty Johnson from here on out. But I'm sure the person with Johnson in your league doesn't have a lot of faith in him. But the peripherals really aren't that bad. I think swapping a relatively worthless bench piece for Ty Johnson right now makes a lot of sense. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the 10 Trend Show.